Hi, I am Sydney. With changing words in the autism community and different preferences of labeling and identity, my official diagnosis at the age of 6 is Asperger's syndrome. I understand this language has changed, but for me, I may still refer to myself as Asperger's, Aspie, neurodivergent, or neurodiverse. The understanding of autism as a spectrum is important, but I also understand that each person may have their own preference. I'm going to use terms that reflect my personal preference. I encourage you to allow those you may minister to or work with to choose their preference of reference. If you've watched any of the seminars with Dan and Stephanie Holmes here at SOAR, those are my parents. They have shared from a broader perspective on autism in marriage and family. But I want to share with you today from my first-person perspective, the life on the autism spectrum. I never really had any friends in school or church, and I can't really say there was ever a time I felt excluded as a child. I grew up thinking I had a lot of friends, and that I was being included. Now, that wasn't the case, but I was also in my own little world. I guess, as a child, that is the perk of autism. You're in your own little world, and you assume everyone is your friend. It wasn't really until we moved to Georgia in 5th grade that I really made the connection of inclusion versus exclusion. In my childhood, I didn't ever really put together that my autism and the behaviors that came from my autism were the reason that people distanced themselves from me. Let me share a bit about my education, as I attended 3 Christian schools and 4 public schools before I was in 3rd grade. I racked up over 50 days of suspensions and then expulsions and transfers all before 4th grade. That's when my mom briefly homeschooled me for a while we tried to figure out next steps. The first Christian school I was at asked me to please not return. That was when I was in preschool. I did fine in the daytime until nap time. That's when problems would occur. I apparently even once led a nap rebellion, which my teachers did not like very much. At the first school, they just asked my parents to come and get me before nap time, since I was resistant, and then they asked them to not re-enroll me. The next Christian school I attended, TK in kindergarten, and I really loved my teacher and classmates. TK went great, but then in kindergarten they combined us with another grade, and when the teacher would teach the other grade, we were supposed to do self-guided work. This was too hard for me. Also, this little Christian school would change the specials, art, PE, music, as they were often run by parents and volunteers. And the schedule changing felt a lot like broken promises. This would usually result in me being dysregulated, and also called meltdowns, when what was promised the day before did not happen. I received my first suspensions and eventual expulsion here. My church in NC had a school, and I was accepted. I had started the process for autism assessment, and the school was made well aware of this. The administrator said to me and my mom, "Do not worry, there is nothing you can do to get expelled from here. You are one of ours now." He promised. My mom noticed how he would speak to the kids. He would get down on one knee, look them in their eye, and hold their shoulder. She explicitly told him, if she's ever upset or escalating, do not get down on her level, do not touch her, it will only make things worse. In the March of that school year, we had a substitute teacher, and she was not aware that my mom worked at the school. She tried to put me in the after-school line, and I told her, no, I do not go to after school because my mom and my grandma worked there, and I was to wait for them. She then physically tried to put me in the line, and I first tried to escape when I was touched again and then had a full-on meltdown. She called the administrator down, and he did the bend down on one knee, demanded eye contact, and he put his hands on my shoulders. I was screaming for space, and he would not give me space. I started spitting. You see, my therapist had been working on with me not to hit or kick when I was upset. But spitting was never discussed. The lack of eye contact and spitting was seen as disrespect, and this called for immediate expulsion. I was told to pack up my desk and things, and I was not welcome back. My mom was an employee of the school, and when she arrived to pick me up, she was just told, "Sorry, she can't come back." This made it very hard because it was where I went to church, and the classroom during the week was where we had Sunday school or small groups on Sunday. Every day I passed by my old classroom when I attended church, and I felt sad that I wasn't wanted. I felt the administrator, who was also a staff pastor, had lied to me, and that really hurt. At church in elementary years, the lead children's pastor and her husband were awesome, and they always made me feel loved. But the breakout classes after the main service were often difficult. I would often escape the room, and what made it hard was a different volunteer each week. I never knew who the teacher would be. Another big issue was my food allergies. I am deathly allergic to peanut butter and tree nuts, yet despite my mom's asking for these food items not to be present while snacks would be served, so I could prepare my own snack, she was rarely informed. She was told that it was too hard to keep her informed about snacks, and she was making it too difficult on the volunteers. To a kid, watching others be allowed to eat snacks and you're not allowed to have those snacks feels a lot like exclusion, and it's hurtful. Churches constantly are doing things with food. If you are not willing to work with people with food allergies, this is also exclusion and not inclusion. At church, I had a few kids I knew, but I didn't realize we weren't friends. I did not get invited to people's parties or things outside of school and church. So I did not feel that exclusion yet, but I soon realized I was not included. I never truly felt excluded until middle school. Middle school was when I noticed that I was different from everybody else, and everyone definitely noticed that I was different too. I had one friend in school who would invite me to things, so my social life basically revolved around her calendar. I didn't go to youth group in middle school at my church because I did a midweek program called Friends, which was 6th to 8th grade girls. It was a very small group. There were 4 of us on a good day, but 2 of the girls also went to my school, and they would pretend not to know me if they saw me in the hall. There was a very clear line between being a church friend and being a school friend. I never cared about being popular in middle school. I just kind of wanted to get to class, keep my head down, and just make it through the school year. Lines were even more drawn in high school. The biggest hurt was the backstabbing betrayal by that one friend I had in middle school, who said she was a Christian. She dumped me to be popular, and other bullying was going on in my Girl Scout troop. I didn't even feel safe emotionally at church. As a freshman in high school, I was deemed old enough to go to youth. However, the youth group was extremely small and very cliquey. I never felt like I fit in. In addition to having to deal with the teenage politics, the youth group was always changing, which was not Autism's friend. Youth pastors were constantly coming and going, so I felt like I was being abandoned over and over again. It's one thing to feel that from your peers, and another to feel it from an adult leader who's supposed to care for you. That so-called friend I mentioned earlier also had a period where she felt like she ran the youth group and it was her show. So when she decided to show up, it always got a little tense. I really hated going to youth group. I remember constantly begging my mom not to go. Sometimes the excuse would be, I don't like these youth pastors, and why connect with them when youth pastors are just going to end up leaving again. Sometimes it would be, no one's going to be there, so what's the point of going? And sometimes it was, I knew who was going to be there, and I just didn't want to be in the same room with them. Whatever the reason was, the underlying reason I never wanted to go was because I was not included. I never felt like I was really known. I do not look at my youth experience in church fondly. So churches, I encourage you to do a better job. Middle school and high school are already hard enough for teens, but for teens on the spectrum, we are really struggling with feeling different, and if there's one place on earth we should feel safe, it's at church. There was a brief moment, maybe during my high school sophomore year, when a certain pastor was there and I felt a little bit of reprieve. Other than that, I loathed every second of how I was treated, and I felt ignored. The obvious thing that churches can do to keep this from happening is to break up cliques, or even more simply, teach students how to love each other and treat people with differences kindly. Did Jesus not say, "And by this you will know you are my disciples, that you love one another"? Where in church do we teach kids and youth how to befriend and be kind to those who are different and love others? Teenagers aren't going to want to go to places they don't think is cool. I get that. It's a delicate balance for sure. But while cliques can definitely help a youth group grow in numbers because everyone wants to be where their friends are, it hurts people like me who don't belong in those cliques and really just want to disappear and get out of there as fast as we can. Nothing says this whole Jesus and church thing is phony than a group of so-called Christians not acting like the body of Christ under the church's roof and on the church's watch. You can kind of expect it almost at public school, but under the roof of a church makes it so much harder. I really think that's where my faith foundation was shaken leading into my college years. The church hurt I experienced lingered with me my freshman and sophomore year of college. Unfortunately, this led me to some very ungodly-like situations that I had to work through and overcome. Soon I realized my new church in college was very inclusive, and I wasn't being treated the way I was when I was a teenager. I was wanted. If I missed a Sunday, multiple people who I didn't know would ask me if I was okay the following Sunday. My absence was noticed. If the church wants to continue to reach those on the autism spectrum, regardless if they're high-functioning like me or require more help and assistance, they need to be an inclusive environment where everyone truly feels welcome and wanted, not like a burden to the organization. A couple of people I've met recently that are my age and also have high-functioning autism also had painful church experiences, and they have left the church, and most of them are now devout atheists, all because they were treated in a similar manner and excluded. Jesus included everyone, even when it made religious people uncomfortable. Jesus is inclusion. What is troubling to me, and to those like me with various differences, is to hear from the pulpit that all are welcome and included, yet the lip service is not real inclusion. Jesus in his earthly ministry spent his time amongst those who were disabled, different, and marginalized by society. He spoke of leaving the 99 to save the one, yet many times churches will not put the time and effort in for including people who are different, citing budget or time, or it just doesn't affect enough people to make this a priority. Surveys by Lifeway in March 2020 found that over 90% of pastors and congregants said they felt persons with disabilities and differences would feel welcomed by their church. But a study by Eric Carter indicates that really only about 11% of the evangelical churches are prepared and actually inclusive, despite 90% of churches feeling like they are inclusive. But what are you doing to make those of us who are different to be included? Have you asked us, those who feel excluded, what an inclusion would look like and feel like? This is a place to start. Ask, then do. For those 90% and above who stated that those with disabilities and differences would feel welcome, do you actually have any of them as congregants or youth or in children's ministry? Do you have anyone with differences as regular attenders? If not, then perhaps they are not feeling too welcomed or as wanted as you may think. It is not about inclusive you feel, it's about how inclusive are you really. Another article I would love to tell you about is by Dr. Steve G. of Key Ministry, called "It's the Hidden Disabilities That Keep Kids Out of Church." A study by Dr. Andrew Whitefield of Clemson University in Journal for Scientific Study in Religion, he stated that kids most excluded from church are those with hidden disabilities. Hidden disabilities include autism spectrum disorders, anxiety, depression, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, learning differences, speech issues, brain injury, and ADHD. The article says, and I quote, "Conditions that negatively impact upon social interaction, or communication are those that result in the greatest impact on church attendance. Another article by USA Today in 2011 by Mark Pinsky said churches mustn't neglect the disabled. The author calls out to church leaders that those with disabilities may be the largest unreached people group in the United States, and that simple practices of inclusion and basic education would go a long way into reaching out to those with differences and disabilities. First of all, to church leaders, I think it starts from the top. Are you preaching and teaching inclusion and modeling this with inclusion behavior? Does the budget reflect that budgetary items are for training workers, volunteers, to work with kids with disabilities and youth with other various issues? Do you have a buddy system in place to help kids and youth? Do you have those in youth looking out for those who are different and maybe friend pairing or helping youth love each other with disabilities as well? Do your buildings have barriers for those with physical issues? Inclusion is more about an atmosphere and nice speeches. It's an action that can be seen and felt by those who are different. There are multiple ways to help and support to start to improve your ministry efforts for those with differences and disabilities. SOAR has many ways to help if you reach out as well. Key Ministry and Joni and Friends are some of the free resources as well as inexpensive tools and programs you can learn about. From the top down, leaders lead and show the way and chart the path toward inclusion. So from my experience, I would like to talk about some practical things that may help adults working with children. I have some tips for teachers, for classroom teachers at school, and church teachers like children's workers and Sunday school classroom teachers and youth workers. I understand that classrooms can be overcrowded and churches are always looking for more volunteers, and you're often not equipped to handle kids with needs like kids on the autism spectrum. I get that church classrooms are run by volunteers. I have a better understanding of what educators deal with when I was a teacher candidate and was training to be a teacher before my observations showed me this was not an environment I could work in. Instead of teaching high school history, I'm going to pursue a graduate degree to pursue my passion to teach, but not in public school. I also volunteer in children's church as a leader, so I know there are plenty of times when there are not enough workers. Here are some of my tips and helpful hints. Number 1, be careful how you say things. Please don't talk down to us just because we have differences. Presume competence. We are people too. I know from a teacher's point of view that those of us on the spectrum can seem to be high maintenance, but we want to be included and understood just like anybody else does. We can tell if a teacher, an adult, wants us to be in their class or not. We can sense if we are seen as a burden. Sometimes you may say something that you did not intend to be hurtful, but we internalize it and we overthink it. These are just a couple phrases to stay away from. I've had experience with someone like you, so I know how to handle it. We are people who need understanding, not handling. You're basically implying we're some sort of zoo animal that requires to be trained and handled, and that doesn't feel good. You hide it so well. This phrase implies that Asperger's and autism is something to hide, and you're praising us for our normal behavior. This embeds the need to hide our identity, and we can become embarrassed by who we are. You're reinforcing neurotypical behavior, which can cause anxiety if we ever start to feel like ourselves. It encourages us to wear a mask, which is emotionally draining to people on the spectrum. Finally, something along the lines of, it's so amazing that someone like you is capable of all the things you're doing. Just because I'm neurodiverse does not mean I cannot achieve everything else that my neurotypical peers do. This phrase implies that you originally had doubts, and the only reason you're believing that I'm capable of things now is because you have seen it. Also, does not feel good. Obviously, there are more than just these 3 phrases, but these are the ones that I've had said to me multiple times by peers, professors, and teachers, even family. Remember that just because we Aspies are so anxiety-driven, we will examine every single word you say and internalize it into a way you probably did not mean. Tip number 2 is to clarify instructions. Teachers, parents, employers, if you think you've explained it thoroughly, explain it again. For example, teachers, you could tell your students to read the instructions and color the worksheet. The instructions say color the shirt blue. All your other students are starting to color immediately, and you see me just sitting there. You probably will start to get on to me for not doing my work, but what's going through my mind is, okay, color the shirt blue. What shade of blue? Light blue, dark blue, navy blue? What about the buttons? Do we color the buttons blue? What about the collar? Do we have to color the collar blue? What about both shades of blue? There's a design on the shirt. Are we supposed to color the design a different color, or are we supposed to color the design blue? My head is starting to spiral with questions that your other students don't ask because they just assume the answer. But I'm not going to assume the answer. I'm always going to ask for clarification. Please don't get frustrated with your students if they ask what you think may be a silly question. Kids on the spectrum do not like do-overs or making mistakes. The questions we ask are for clarity to make sure we understand what we're doing before we do the work. Don't just tell us to read the directions. If we ask a specific question about the directions, it's because we're stressing out about them and need more information. It's not defiance or disobedience. Parents, you also need to be clear with instructions. You can't simply just go tell us to put on our PJs. Well, which PJs do you want us to wear? How long do we have to, before we have to put on the pajamas? Do you want us to come back to you once we have on the pajamas? Do you want us to wear the new pajamas or the ones we wore last night? Once again, we need extra clarification with what you want us to do. And please give one instruction at a time or use a visual system to help know what order is expected for various routines, like a bedtime routine. Empower us and give us the tools to be as independent as we can, which may vary from person to person and skill set. Tip number 3 is to be patient and communicate frustration calmly. Kind of backtracking to number 2, sometimes you're going to get frustrated with answering all of our questions. Please be patient with us. We're not trying to upset you. We're trying to calm our nerves and make sure we have all the information we need before we complete a task. If you're on a time crunch, ask us to do something a few minutes before you actually need it done. Rushing us only makes the anxiety worse, so give us ample time and time to give prompts. This gives us time to ask our questions, and you will still have the task done by when you want it. Verbalize any frustration you have in a calm manner. For example, Sydney, starting to become really frustrated by all of these detailed questions. I know you're just seeking clarification, but we have a lot of things to get done today. I promise to be as clear as I can if you promise to assume some of the minor details. I promise I won't get upset if you get a minor detail wrong. Partner together with us, work together, and empower us. Please do not punish a meltdown. If we have a meltdown, it's because we are overwhelmed with anxiety or sensory overload, and we start to break down. Meltdowns are a form of emotional dysregulation and a form of communication that express that something has unbalanced or dysregulated us. Understanding functions of behavior and understanding that behavior is a communication and meltdowns are usually communicating anxiety, being overwhelmed, or maybe even sensory, but not usually about disobeying or being disrespectful. If we knew how to communicate what we needed, we would. Meltdowns are not fun for us either. They are exhausting. Punishing them makes them feel like you do not understand or care. To understand or help, work with professionals to understand the difference between disorder, dysregulation, diagnosis, and disability from defiance, disobedience, and disrespect. In Christian culture especially, anything that is deemed disrespectful is almost as an unpardonable sin. But understanding autism and your child as an individual